Welcome, viewers and listeners, to the Thinking Fan FC Premier League podcast. Each week, we get together with our besties, who are current pro players, real coaches, academics, and stat heads. Today, I'm joined by soccer analyst Harshal, Patel, and coach David Seymour. I'm host Chris Mumford. Bella ciao. We're sponsored by the Premier League Guide, a 300-page book for those mad about football. Moneyball for football, opposition analysis plus eye candy. The current update is available at www.thinkingfanmedia.com and on Amazon. Matchday 28 had some interesting bits and pieces to it. We're just starting to hit the business end of the league, particularly as FA, Europa, and Champions League matches start to stack on top of each other. As far as the weekend starting, we had some interesting pieces in that Newcastle and Aston Villa tied at 1-1. I'm not sure that's particularly dramatic, though. I do think there's some thoughts to have on the relegation battle. Leeds and Chelsea was a dramatic, energized 0-0. Box to box, there seemed to be a lot of very interesting things going on, though I can't say that anybody really showed exceptional talent in front of either one of the goals. It was really fun to see that high energy between that Chelsea does possess and just that Leeds breathes. Harshal, any thoughts on that match?
I mean, you expect that Leeds games are going to be entertaining, but I guess it's a testament to the job that Thomas Tuchel's side did in this match it was interesting from a tactical point of view. There were quite a few things going on, but it wasn't the end-to-end sort of all-action games that we've come to see from Leeds. I think Leeds will be happy that they've managed to keep out Chelsea and secure a point. I don't think there have been too many nil-nil draws that they've been part of under Bielsa. So that's obviously something that they will be happy about, the fact that they kept a clean sheet. Chelsea, on the other hand, it's been very difficult to score against them since Tuchel came in. I think they've only conceded 2 goals in the 10 games that he's been in charge. So, and it was more of the same here. Even though there were a few chances for both teams hit the woodwork. Tyler Roberts had forced Edouard Mendy into a very good save. But I wouldn't say there were too many clear-cut opportunities. They were more sort of maybe efforts from range or goals that would have been considered very good goals had they been scored, not necessarily a case of the striker maybe missing a clear-cut opportunity in that sense. So it's both teams, I think, would be happy with the point. It keeps Chelsea in the top 4. They've been absolutely brilliant, I think, since Tuchel took over. They've not lost a game under him, basically. So I don't think they're going to drop out of the top 4. They come the end of the season, they're definitely going to be in the Champions League spots. And I'm looking forward to see how this Chelsea team evolves now under him, because it looks like they've got the defensive side of things down very, in a very good space. But I think Tuchel will want more attacking impetus and more creativity. And he's trying to still find the individuals and structure that can give him that. And I also expect to potentially see him move to a back 4 sooner rather than later. He's playing a back 3 in most games. He started with sort of a back 4 against Leeds, but it was a hybrid where it was back 3 in possession, back 4 out of possession, and it was sort of moving between those 2 systems. So it'll be interesting to see how all of that develops.
Yeah, I think Chelsea, they've had 3 draws out of the last 5 and 2 wins. So I guess the upside is that West Ham and Everton and Tottenham have not really been able to gain on them as they are having these draws here. As far as Leeds go, in some ways they're able to right the ship. They've had 3 losses out of the last 4, and they were able to secure a draw. And Leeds' schedule going forward has a couple of difficult matches coming up, but for the most part, surrounding that is a fair number of the relegation zone teams. I would call. As far as The next games goes Crystal Palace, West Brom, 1-0 win, where Crystal Palace was able to move up above Leeds. A bit of a surprise, Everton Burnley. Burnley was able to come away with a 2-1 victory, and I probably consider that a steal because it was at Everton. David, what's your take on that game?
Yeah, it was the second Burnley game in the last week that I've really enjoyed actually. Yeah, I think I took a couple of things from it. I think that it was funny that Dwight McNeil, I mean, he's going to get a lot of plaudits for the goal, and quite rightly. But I think even if you ignore that goal, McNeil was really good and was at the centre of a lot of what Burnley did in attack. And I've been trying to watch more of Burnley recently, and I had a conversation with a couple of other analysts last week about McNeil and asked for their opinion on him because he's highly rated. And I watched him a few times and I just didn't feel like I was getting it. Well, I felt like watching him on the weekend, I started to see why people were raving about him. And the other thing that maybe a controversial take, I really like Chris Wood. I think Chris Wood's a good player. And I saw there's a stat, he scored something like 1 in every 3 Premier League games, and he looked really good again against Everton. And I wonder if, I mean, I don't want to harp on too much about West Ham, but there's been a lot of talk about West Ham trying to sign a second striker to Antonio. They want a physical forward who can run in behind. And I'm watching Chris Wood and I'm thinking that would be a pretty sensible option. So I enjoyed watching it from that perspective. I think I was obviously surprised by the result. I think we probably all were a little bit. And yeah, I mean, as an Everton fan, you'll be gutted to not at least take a point from that game.
Interesting. In other matches, ManCity beat Fulham pretty handily 3-0. Brighton ended up winning 2-1 against Southampton. Southampton seemed like they were about to stop the free fall, but they continue to fall, and Brighton seems to be picking it up a little bit in terms of trying to ease away from the relegation vortex. Any thoughts on that match?
Yeah, Southampton. First of all, I think Southampton are absolutely not safe yet because they've had a wretched run of form. I think they've won 2 of their last 15 or 17 games or something like that. So, and that's relegation form. So, yes, they still have somewhat of a cushion in terms of the number of teams and the number of points between them and the relegation zone. But if they continue in this vein, I would not be surprised to see them fall down the table even more. Brighton really needed this win, I think. And they've moved above Newcastle, who they play next. So that Brighton-Newcastle game is going to be massive in the context of the relegation battle. But it was interesting that Brighton were able to pull out this win. It was almost a direct result of Graham Potter's tactical changes at halftime, where Brighton started with a back 3. Dan Burn got injured just around halftime or before in the first half. So the second half saw Brighton come out with a back 4, but it was the other way around. They started with the back 4 with Dan Burn at left back, but they came back in the second half with the back 3 and wing backs with Andy Zakiri, who was a striker playing at left wing back, and Pascal Gross, who's sort of a central midfielder playmaker, playing at right wing back. Leandro Trossard was moved from the left wing into a sort of number 10 position with Danny Welbeck up front along. So that changed the game completely because it allowed Brighton to be able to play through Southampton's press in a much better fashion. Potter spoke in the post-match conference about how he was using Dan Burn at left back as a direct sort of physical and aerial presence against Kyle Walker-Peters, who is the Southampton right back. There's a very obvious height mismatch there. And Zakiri, who's about 6'3", has that height advantage over Kyle Walker-Peters, which is why Potter said that's why he wanted him on the left. And the changes worked. They were able to play out from the back much more effectively. The second Brighton goal, which was the one that Trossard scored, was very well worked. Adam Lallana played a brilliant pass to Danny Welbeck between the lines, who laid it off with another brilliant touch to Trossard, who fired into the top corner. So it was a good example of how Potter's system, his tactics, his coaching can work. But I think Brighton will need to first survive this season in the Premier League before they can maybe look to improve the quality of the squad to match the system that Potter's putting in place. Because I think Brighton are one of the best teams to watch in the Premier League in terms of the way they play their football, but they've just struggled in both boxes, basically. They've struggled with their defending and they've struggled with finishing off the chances that they've created. So if they do manage to survive the season, it will be very interesting to see what business they do in the summer to improve the quality of the squad.
So if we turn our attention to the Leicester absolute thrashing of Sheffield United, Leicester City, it's 5-0. David, there's some really bad news for most Sheffield United fans. Chris Wilder was let go. Any thoughts on that? Was that justified or not?
It's a difficult one because on the face of it, no. Despite what's happened this season, when you look at what Chris Wilder's done at Sheffield, I think the fact that the fans, and it seems the players were very much still behind him, you'd say no. Some of the reports that I saw coming out were discussing apparently that the owner wasn't overly happy with their summer transfer business and wanted to bring a director of football, which Chris Wilder was against. And that seemed to be the majority of the talk there. And that's a difficult one to argue about, and not even necessarily just this summer. There's been some, since they've really been in the Prem, they have spent good money on certain players. You can go back to at least Musa and beginning of the first season, he was quite good for them in their first year, but certainly hasn't been there this year. But then you look at Ryan Brewster, I think it's probably, borne the brunt of that quite a bit. That was a £20 million signing, which didn't really pay off. I quite like Sander Berger, but he hasn't really hit the ground running. Is that fair to say, Harshal, would you say?
He was good when he came in last year. He came in January last year. He had an immediate impact. He's been injured and he's out for the season, I think. So obviously hasn't had an impact this season.
That's why.
But I think he will be, yeah. And I think he will probably be picked up by a Premier League club in the summer. Another transfer they made, when they came back, not came back, but sort of when they got promoted back to the Premier League last year. I think they picked up Ollie McBurney from Swansea for around 20 million or so as well. And even he's not really uprooted too many trees in terms of goal scoring. So they have spent decent amounts of money on certain players who haven't really returned too much.
Yeah, I didn't realize that about Berger. Okay, well, I'll retract that one. But then you even look at, I know that Chris probably isn't a fan of Aaron Ramsdale. I haven't been overly impressed with him in between the sticks. What are your thoughts on Ramsdale, Chris?
I am fairly ambivalent about him. I've actually spoken to some scouts, and they don't think he has what it takes to be in the Premier League, and in goalkeeping, the margins are just so fine. I don't think he can make a compelling case that he's done a fabulous job. He's in the lower tier in terms of prevented goals per 90, but not the bottom of the league in from that respect. It's very interesting to see. I was kind of hoping that Sheffield United was that story where they stay with the coach even when he goes down, but this whole sporting director movement, I generally support, and I think that if that is indeed the case, it's fairly easy to understand why Sheffield United probably wants to go in a different direction, because I just think football clubs need to modernize.
I will say this though, Chris, is that if you're going to do the director of football, you ideally want to do it when a new coach comes in, because for that to work, it needs to be a symbiotic relationship where really that director of football should be involved with the employment of the coach. And I wonder if maybe that's actually what Sheffield United were potentially angling for anyway.
Yeah. Well, we'll never know that piece. I really wonder about Sheffield United, how they'll fare next year. But yeah, It's really unfortunate because I think all of us really got behind that team. It was such a great story last year, and now all of a sudden it just seems to be absolutely left in tatters. So we'll see where we go with that one. Let's turn our attention to the North London derby. That was interestingly enough, Tottenham got ahead 1-0, but Arsenal were able to equalize and go beyond that. Harshal, what did you see in that game that got captured your interest?
I will say that I was a little disappointed that Spurs sort of reverted back to the way they were playing around December of last year, where they essentially sat back, waited for the opposition to make mistakes and maybe get a goal on the counter attack rather than imposing themselves more on the game, which has given them results as we've seen in the last couple of weeks. Where there's, I mean, yes, obviously the teams they've faced are nowhere near, I wouldn't say nowhere near, but they're not as good as, say, Arsenal on the ball. So it can be argued that maybe Spurs were a little justified in sitting back against Arsenal. But I would personally think that, I mean, Arsenal are still a work in progress. They've just over the last week in the Europa League and in the Premier League, they've conceded goals when the opposition has been pressing them high up the pitch through their own mistakes. So they can still sort of shoot themselves in the foot. And we spoke about that last week. So I'm a little surprised that Mourinho didn't try and approach this game in that manner where they pressed Arsenal high and force them into making mistakes, which they do make when they're playing out of the back. Obviously,
Harshal, to be fair though, just to jump in, totally agree with what you said about the pressing. But actually, if you look at some of Arsenal's maybe lesser results recently, teams have had success against them by letting them have the ball and being difficult to break down. So, but with that mix of intelligent pressing at the same time, I think off the top of my head, I think back to sort of even the City Arsenal game back in February, or Burnley Arsenal, where Burnley drew 1-1 with them. And I think that, it wasn't a good performance from Spurs, but I don't necessarily think that I don't think the game plan was terrible from Jose. I think the execution was terrible.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I can agree with that, but yeah, it's basically the case of, I'm not saying they had to execute the full-on high press, but Burnley are the perfect example, I think, last week, where they were sitting back, but they were choosing their moments to press intelligently. And I think Spurs have the personnel to be able to sort of execute that. So that was a little bit disappointing. Obviously, Eric Lamella's goal was fantastic. It's probably one of the goals of the season. And it's an interesting stat that I saw, not exactly relevant to the Spurs Arsenal game, but I think it was in the Europa League where Lamella played the full 90 minutes, I think, without even attempting a single pass with his right foot. So that tells you how left-footed he is as a player. And even in that situation where he scores with the Rabona, you would think, and I think the Arsenal defense were expecting him to go with his right foot, and that's why he was, I think, able to get the space to pull off that shot, because nobody expected him to try and wrap his left foot around his standing leg and put the ball in the corner. So that was a brilliant goal. But yeah, I think it took Lamella getting sent off and Arsenal scoring from the penalty and Spurs going down to them actually then throwing men forward and having a bunch of chances. Kane hitting the post from a set piece. They created a couple of other promising opportunities. So I think, I mean, if they'd chosen to do that earlier on in the game, this Arsenal team isn't exactly a very strong team defensively. So you can get at them. And I think Spurs missed a chance to do that in this game.
I actually think that, I think that West Ham will cause problems for Arsenal, because I would expect West Ham to be defensively organised but press intelligently at times against Arsenal next weekend. So that, I know we'll come to that a bit later, but I just thought I'd drop that in there. Do you think, though, sorry, Chris, do you think that Spurs, I don't see them getting rid of Mourinho. I think they're going to have to double down on that because of how big his contract is. They can't play the way that he's shown in the last few games. Yep, okay, we won't necessarily sit back all the time, but they did do that against Arsenal, and there will be games where he wants to do that. And I don't think it's possible when you have players like Matt Doherty or Davinson Sanchez. Davinson Sanchez was terrible, and yeah, it wasn't a penalty, but it shouldn't have got to that stage anyway. What do you think on that? Either of you?
I I'm inclined to agree with you. They're going to have to keep Mourinho just because they signed a contract without any outs. I don't think they're going to have a ton of money to go out, and they need goals scored, and they need to eliminate mistakes in the back line. I think whenever there's a problem, I tend to go for a aging striker that's very effective. Like be fascinating to see a Cavani over there, or even a Giroud. And I know people would push back and say, "Wait a minute, there's a certain style of play, and they won't fit in there." But I think people have kind of caught on to the Kane and Son show, and you take either one of those guys out, and with Son being out for a bit, I don't see a lot of good things happening for Tottenham. Now, in defense of Tottenham, I do think, Arsenal had 13 shots to Tottenham 6 total. Both only had 3 shots on target. And as far as XG, kind of ended up what the eye test was, 1.87 for Arsenal and 0.87 for Tottenham. And I feel like there needs to be a carnivore in the box. And I think Cavani is a perfect example of that carnivore, or Giroud, which can pull folks out of shape and hopefully open up things a little more for his Son, or Kane. And I don't think it costs a whole lot of money, and it's certainly not long-term money. So that's probably more of a signing that I would favor. Harshal,
that would be interesting. There actually are some quite interesting free agents coming up this summer. I think I mentioned on a previous podcast that Jerome Boateng is going to be available on a free, and I think that would be a good move for Mourinho and Spurs to bring him in. Some of the other ones that I thought, that could be interesting. Ryan Bertrand, Sergio Ramos. You've got Moussa Marega, who's that Porto striker, who could be worth a gamble as a second striker, so when you bring on. And obviously you've got on the further end, higher end, you've obviously, despite Messi, you've got Donnarumma, Alaba, Depay, Wijnaldum. So you've got a load of big name players available this summer. And I wonder if for a team that hasn't got a huge amount of, let's say, transfer capital, but maybe could support a bigger wage budget like a Spurs, that might be something they look to bring in, maybe 2 or 3. What do you think?
Yeah. Just to go back to Chris's earlier point, I don't think Spurs maybe need an attacking signing as much, because they basically need someone to play second fiddle to Kane when he needs to be rested. They have Carlos Vinicius, who's on loan from Benfica at the moment. I don't know if that deal will be turned into a permanent one, but they need someone of that profile who's content to sit on the bench and come on and maybe contribute when possible. And yes, if a Cavani or a Giroud can agree to fulfill that role, then that makes sense. But I think the attacking side of things just needs Mourinho to maybe let off the shackles a little bit. Because, I mean, if Dele Alli sticks around, you've got obviously Kane and Son, you've got Dele Alli, you've got Giovanni Lo Celso, who's injured at the moment. He will come back and play at number 10 most probably. Lamela, Lucas Moura, Steven Bergwijn. I don't know what's going to happen with Bale, but let's say Bale sticks around at Spurs as well. So that's a pretty hefty attacking lineup you have with different profiles of players and people who can come in and, play a role off the bench, who can be sort of rotated with the main cast. And there isn't too much of a drop off in quality. So I think the problems with Spurs are, one, that I think Mourinho needs to let off the handbrake a little more. And 2, that I think they do need to upgrade their defensive personnel. Both their right backs, I think, are defensive liabilities. Probably need an upgrade at centre back as well. Reguilon is a good left back. I think he's a very good, and obviously they have Ben Davies as the more defensive option in that
Ben Davies
spot.
Is poor though. Ben Davies is nowhere near that level.
Of course, but I'm just saying as a more defensive option than Reguilon. But they definitely need. I don't
think Ben Davies can defend. I really don't. The amount of times that he lets his marker go or just doesn't track or whatever. But you said about taking the brakes off or letting them loose. Bale did not track back like at all. Doherty was struggling. and I think that's the issue. If you let them off, and these are players that aren't going to necessarily track back, and you can be almost too top heavy. And it was just a bit of a mismatch with. It was an odd performance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, Tottenham's in 7th place now. They're tied for 5th or 6th in terms of goals for, and they're about 5th or 6th for goals against. So they're kind of where they should be if you look at goals for and goals against. And I don't think that they're 1 or 2 moves away from changing everything. And that's probably why they're going to struggle. Hopefully they'll make it into Europa competition, because everyone is going to get a participation medal for being in that. And
I do think if you gave them basically, other than Reguilon, but you gave them a backup left back, and then you just clean house defensively, maybe even with the goalkeeper. I know you're a Luis fan, but I haven't been sold in this season. I actually think that that's a team that could do something. I mean, they might still do something. If you told me right now that Spurs win the Europa League and maybe even spring a surprise against City in the Carabao Cup final, I wouldn't be shocked.
Okay. Well, I guess time will tell on that. Let's turn our attention probably to what y'all is going to be y'all's favorite match to talk about, which is Man United and West Ham. Harshal, why don't you take a first cut at that?
Definitely wasn't. Okay, I mean, that's probably being a bit harsh on Man United. I was going to say that it wasn't a great watch, but like on second thoughts, United actually played pretty well in the first half. United were creating chances, they were able to get in behind West Ham on occasion, which is something they've obviously struggled with in terms of playing against deep defensive blocks. I thought Bruno Fernandes had a really good game. He did look tired at times, but his movement was really good. He was picking up the ball in tight spaces as he does usually, and obviously facilitating the rest of United's attackers, of whom I thought Mason Greenwood was the best player on the pitch. He obviously had, I think, 2 of the best chances in the game. The one in the first half where Fabianski makes a brilliant save, and then the second half where he hits the post where he should be scoring, I think. But he had a really good game. Even though he started as the centre forward, he was constantly drifting out to the right, picking up the ball and either driving at the defense or sending in crosses. One of which, again, I think Marcus Rashford should have scored in the first half. He had a free header at the far post and sort of completely chose the wrong option with what type of header to go for, and it wasn't even on target. So I thought United were pretty good. Obviously, just scoring the 1 goal leaves you open to being counter-attacked and conceding an equalizer. But West Ham didn't really, I don't think there was too much that they did in open play. Threatened a little bit here and there from set pieces, but other than that, there wasn't really too much for United to worry about. The only thing that I was a little concerned from a United point of view was that Solskjaer didn't make any substitutions, which I can understand because they're literally, it's a long injury list that United have at the moment, and this was a crucial game where he needed 3 points. But the knock-on effect of that could be felt in the Europa League on Thursday, where it's again a very crucial game. United go away to AC Milan. It's 1-1. Milan have the away goal, so United do need to score. And I mean, Solskjaer has said that he expects a lot of the guys who are injured to be back for that game. So Pogba, Van de Beek, Cavani, Martial, all of them are expected to be back in some form for that game. So, I mean, that should bring some relief to United. But overall, yeah, pretty happy that we got the win and sort of on the way to locking down second place.
David?
I mean, obviously I was disappointed. I think that a lot of the fallout of the game seemed to be people saying, why didn't West Ham give it more of a go, seemed to be the phrasing that people went with, which I disagreed with. And it was frustrating to watch. It wasn't the most exciting game, but that's kind of, I think, what we wanted to do. I think if you play open against Manchester United, that's when you're going to allow them to be at their strongest. They've got teams that can really hurt you if you do that. And so, from my perspective, United, probably the best counter-attacking team in the league. And you don't want to leave space behind. You don't want to allow yourself vulnerable to the transition. So I didn't hate the game plan. And if you look at the score, I mean, we lost because of an own goal from a set piece. It's very close to getting a really big point away at United. So I don't think it was necessarily the disaster that I think a lot of West Ham fans thought it was. I mean, I think West Ham, a lot of fans wanted to see us go out there with sort of like a swashbuckling approach, and we just don't have the players to do that. We wouldn't be able to compete with, Manchester United player for player are a much better side than us. I thought it was good to see Maguire play as well as he did, because I know that there's still a lot of people out there who don't seem to think that he's a top centre back somehow. And I know a few of my West Ham friends have even been. I had a big argument with one of my West Ham friends with him saying that he thinks Craig Dawson's better than Harry Maguire, which I very strongly disagreed with, and I think that his performance.
It's the fee, David. It's the fee. It's the 80 million.
It is the fee. It is the fee. I've said that all along. He was absolutely superb last night. What a player.
So in the past, I've talked a lot about my disaffection towards teams that park the bus as a tactic. I will say in this circumstance, I totally understand why West Ham did it. And at the end of the day, it took a set piece for ManUnited to score the goal. And West Ham generally defends very well in those situations. So I think West Ham did what they needed to do. They were probably hoping to nick a point, really with the idea of doing their best to stay in contention for a Europa slot. So they're still in fifth place now with 48 points. Chelsea's at 51, Everton's at 46. So I still think there's some hope for them to punch above their weight in terms of league standing. As far as Manchester United, my sense was fatigue, lots of fatigue. I really wonder with Milan, who has, I think at approximately 25 years old, an average age, is one of the youngest in terms of starters of all the big five leagues. It'll be fascinating to see how things all play out there. So those formerly injured reinforcements would be much needed as we move into matches later this week. So I want to turn our attention a little bit looking forward to, there are going to be some interesting matches coming up, some bits and pieces, as we know, a lot of Europe action going on. As far as Premier League, on Friday, Fulham will take on Leeds. I imagine Leeds is going to try to look to buffer up its 12th position and try to move up a position or two against Fulham. Brighton is playing Newcastle. That's going to have some very interesting relegation implications. And then Aston Villa is going to play Tottenham. David, any thoughts on where Tottenham goes from last, from the North London derby to playing Aston Villa, which I think would be fairly important for them to get into Europa contention?
I think they calm down. I think they hit the reset button and go again. I think that Villa present a different kind of problem. They're a counter-attacking team, and so we'll wait and see how Jose's approach to that. It could be to give Villa the ball and let them try and work out how to break Spurs down and make mistakes, or it could be Spurs to control the game and nullify any sort of counter-attacks. But we'll wait and see, because I wouldn't back Spurs at this rate to go through 90 minutes without making a mistake. So it'll be an interesting game.
I would rate it, unfortunately, I think it's going to probably be a 1-1 game. I just think without Son, Tottenham really struggles, and that's why I disagree still with you, Harshal. I think they need someone crafty like a Cavani to certainly pick apart lesser teams, and then be there someone that can occasionally come up with a big game goal. David, what's your take on West Ham Arsenal? Will West Ham be able to regroup, and how are they going to do against an Arsenal?
I'm hoping that Arsenal revert to being an inconsistent side. Obviously, they've got that side to them, but they've played quite well in a couple of recent games. So we'll wait and see. West Ham, historically, not that you should really look at previous games, but historically, West Ham struggle against Arsenal, and player for player, Arsenal, despite maybe not being the most impressive team they've ever been, they are still a better team than West Ham. But I think it's easy to sort of look at West Ham's recent losses, which against City and United, and sort of feel like, oh, it's all doom and gloom, whereas those games are only losses by 1 goal. So it's a really big game for West Ham. I think if we lose this one, then I'll just be very happy with top 7. I think if we win this one, we're right back in that hunt for the top 4. So it's a really big game for how the rest of the season pans out.
Interesting. Let's turn our attention to the FA Cup. Harshal, I imagine Leicester City and ManUnited is tops on your list in terms of what you're going to pay attention to. How do you see this game unfolding?
It's going to be a tough one because Leicester have done really well over the last couple of weeks, even though they've been missing key players. James Maddison and Harvey Barnes are big parts of their attacking structure who they've not had available for the last couple of weeks, probably not going to have available for some time to come. But other players have stepped up. Kelechi Iheanacho, who we should have spoken about earlier as well, he grabbed a hat-trick at the weekend, and that's now, I think, 5 goals in his last 3 games for Leicester. So he's on a really good run of form. And it's interesting to note that Brendan Rodgers is playing a back 3 so that he can, I mean, not just because of this, but a big part of that is the fact that he can play Iheanacho and Vardy together. And Jose Perez sort of played that floating number 10 role behind them against Sheffield United. And the 3 of them were devastating. I thought Vardy showed another side of his game in terms of turning provider. He ended up with 2 assists, 3 if you count the own goal. And both of them were sort of taking turns to drop off and run in behind. It wasn't always Iheanacho who was dropping deep and Vardy running in behind. We saw the reverse movement happen quite a few times as well. So it'll be a difficult game for United from a defensive point of view because they do struggle at times against a front 2 and against teams that have a lot of movement in that area. I'll be interested to see it. Obviously, it depends on the sort of team that Solskjaer picks. He'll probably need to rotate a little bit because it's more or less been the same 11 to 13 odd players who've played over the last 2-3 weeks. So as I mentioned earlier, some of those guys who are coming back from injury will be needed in the Europa League game and the FA Cup game. But yeah, it's going to be a tough game. I think it's away from home as well for United. It's at the King Power, if I'm not mistaken. So it will definitely be a difficult game. And I don't really want to make a prediction here because Leicester could easily beat United.
Interesting. David, any thoughts on the Everton ManCity match?
No, probably nothing groundbreaking. I think just on the competition as a whole, it's you sort of look at the draw, and I'm just really hopeful that Southampton or Bournemouth can hit some form just in the time for the semi-final, because I'd love to see one of those make it through to the final. But yeah, nothing overly on the individual battles.
Okay. It's so hard to bet against ManCity right now. You know, their second team would probably be a top 4 in the league if they had to play them by themselves. How about in terms of Champions League? Let's see, in terms of the fixtures: Real Madrid, Atalanta, Bayern, Lazio, Chelsea, Atletico Madrid. And then ManCity, Mönchengladbach. Any thoughts on the Chelsea Atletico Madrid game? That's a 1-0 aggregate right now that Chelsea has the advantage on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see Chelsea throwing that away. I know Atletico have been a little bit inconsistent recently, and obviously Chelsea look just so formidable. Mm-hmm. So I see Chelsea staying through that. And I tell you what, they're just in Europe in whole, there is, I think, some very interesting teams left in both competitions still. And I'm actually enjoying the Europa League this season just as much as the Champions League. I don't know how you feel about that, Harshal.
I absolutely agree. There are quite a few interesting teams. Rangers, for example, doing really well in the Europa League. They've obviously clinched the Scottish title, and Steven Gerrard's doing a fantastic job there. Inter Milan again, I mean, it looks like they're going to win Serie A and they're going to be a strong force in the Europa League. So I absolutely agree. And it's not just this season. I think a lot of people, just because it's the Europa League, it's Thursday night football, and you're considered to be a weaker team if you're in the Europa League. It's considered to be basically the unwanted, unwanted family member of European competitions. But you can really get some good teams, good blend of styles in that competition, and we're seeing that this season. So yeah, both competitions look quite interesting.
Inter aren't in it, are they? I thought they went out the Champions League bottom, right? I think. Are you thinking of AC, Harshal?
Yeah,
my bad.
Yeah, it's Inter's in an enviable position, and they can just focus on the league right now.
Yeah, my bad.
Well, it looks like Juve are now in that have that luxury as well now.
I guess so. That's I guess that's not something that they would have voted for, but unfortunately, some other folks voted for them. How about in terms of the Milan ManUnited match, Harshal? Any thoughts on that one?
It's going to be extremely difficult because in the first leg, Milan pressed United really well. They laid pressing traps all over the pitch. United struggled to progress the ball. Milan had, I think, some of the best chances in the game, although United also did have a few chances which they didn't take. But I think it was a real blow to concede that goal right at the end. A 1-0 would have made so much of a difference as compared to a 1-1, especially because Milan have the away goal and they're getting back. I think Theo Hernandez is going to be fit to play. Zlatan's going to be back. Hakan Çalhanoğlu might just be back as well. So a lot of the players who were injured for the first leg are going to be back for Milan. That will probably be the case for United as well. But it's going to, and United have done well away from home for the last year, 18 months or so, I guess. But it will be a difficult game. United need to score. I expect both teams to score, but Milan could easily knock out United.
I don't see United playing as poorly as they did in the first leg again, and I think United will prevail despite being away from home.
I'm inclined to agree. I think that that Milan is going to be a team to beat in Europe in 2023. They're probably, they need to fix their Zlatan problem within the next. Maybe they get one more year out of him, but they've got such a dynamic squad under the age of 26. It's just going to be really exciting to see the resurgence of Milan back into European football. So I guess the key takeaways, we've got a lot of bits and pieces, some interesting Champions League, FA Cup, Europa Cup. What's not to ask for? I'm going to hit a slight pause on the Premier League matches, though there's some bits and pieces that are being made up. But we should probably wrap it up here, gentlemen. We're sponsored by the Premier League Guide, Moneyball for Football, Opposition Analysis plus Eye Candy. The current update is available at www.thinkingfanmedia.com and on Amazon. Please subscribe to Thinking Fan Football Club on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform. Join us next week for our Thinking Fans podcast. For now, bella ciao, ciao, ciao.